Stand for the flag salute. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sue, if you could call roll.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Cannon is absent, so Mr. DiMattei.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Woodward.
Here.
Mr. Herzog.
Here.
Mr. Sevison.
Larry, you need to unmute.
Hold it again.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Here.
Thank you. And Mr. Hauge.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to It's important for Placer County to conduct our business to ensure essential services for our citizens. We're doing everything we can to facilitate residents staying at home and physical distancing. We encourage the public to engage in the process. With that in mind, our public comment for this meeting will be offered in person and through a remote virtual process. Citizens who wish to comment today should be prepared to comment via the Zoom platform. To join virtually online, click on the link on the main Planning Commission homepage. Please make sure your microphone is muted. You may also call in using our toll-free numbers to hear the meeting at 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247, and please enter the webinar ID 920-5415-7729. Please press star 6 to mute yourself. If you would like to make public comment virtually, please raise your hand with hand icon at the bottom of the page. If you are calling in, please press star 9 to raise your hand. Please be prepared to speak at the time I open the public comment for the specific item you would like to address, which may include public comment for matters not included on the agenda, a consent item, or a timed item. If attending in person today, we kindly request that once you have commented on your item, return to your seat or leave the hearing room from the exit-only door to accommodate for physical distancing and allow for others to provide in-person public comment. Each commenter is entitled to 3 minutes of comment. Thank you for your patience as we work to preserve the safety and health of all meeting participants and ensure that each citizen wishes to comment has the opportunity to do so. So at this time, if we could have the planning director's report.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Commission, E.J. Evaldi with the Planning Services Division. Just a quick update on the Board of Supervisors meetings on Tuesday. The board held an all-day workshop on the county's budget. And that, let's see, and then so next week, April 13th, the Health and Safety Element Workshop will be going to the board. On April 27th, staff will be bringing an update on the Placer Legacy Program. May 11th is this tentatively scheduled date for the AT&T cell tower appeal. And then on June 22nd is the Matrenga appeal. That was a height variance to the horse arena. That was previously scheduled for April 27th, so that's been bumped out a couple months. So a lot of planning items upcoming at the board. For Planning Commission, I had anticipated 2 meetings this month, but we are going to cancel the April 22nd meeting. So that's our next meeting scheduled. That will be canceled. So we'll be meeting again on May 13th. And that's all I have for you today.
All right, thank you. All right. I will now open public comment for any matters not on the Planning Commission agenda. First of all, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on planning or matters not on the agenda? Yeah, come forward. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I might ask for an extra minute or 2 at the end of my 3 minutes. I'll do my best to get through it in 3 minutes, but I just had a few things to say. I wanted to express my disappointment with the county and its representatives at the
Please state your name for the record.
I'm sorry, my name is Mark Silva. I'm a District 1 resident, Placer County. I wanted to express my disappointment with the county and its representatives in the way the Planning Commission meeting was held on March 25th. I'd like to remind you that That meeting was recorded and is available online for you to watch over again to confirm the statements that I'm making today. I wanted to talk about Mr. Schmidt, senior planner for the county. It was widely felt amongst all community members that I spoke to after the first two planning commission meetings regarding the baseline commercial project that Mr. Schmidt's presentation was subjectively in favor of the developer or the proposal, and it felt to us that it should have been more so an objective take on things. Just a couple examples. I was made aware from people who attended it in person last week or 2 weeks ago that there were several whispering meetings between Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Johnson, the representative for the developer. I'm not sure what the reason for that is or why it was necessary. During his report, he brought up the upcoming project, the Baseline Marketplace project, and talked about the 3 big box stores that are expected to go in there. However, he failed to mention the 3 gas stations that are going in, and that fact is so relevant in this case, and he was aware of it because of his participation in the previous 2 MAC meetings, that was one of our major concerns. For him to have left that out of his report is incomprehensible to me. At the original MAC meeting regarding this project, there were some technical difficulties. I guess certain members of the MAC were disconnected because of a power outage. Mr. Schmidt, you can go back and watch this video. Mr. Schmidt attempted to push the project through to the Planning Commission without a quorum from the MAC. Moving on to Mr. Cannon and his conduct. I wish he was here today to hear this, but I've never seen such a blatant display of backroom politics being flaunted out in public. He went on a 20-minute tangent with Mr. Johnson, patting themselves on the back for every project that they've had a hand in over the last 21 years, and he made it very clear before public comment that he had no intention of changing his mind on a yes vote for this project. I went back and watched the video over again 2 nights ago, and it was a slap in the face to every community member who took the time to comment during that meeting. Mr. Cannon also expressed concern for the developer's property rights as a property owner during that meeting. The developer purchased that land knowing full well that it was zoned, low density residential. There should be no feeling sorry for a property owner in that case. If you don't mind, I'll be done in just 1 minute.
Oh, can I make a statement?
Yes, sir.
A real quick one?
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to clarify, you're talking about a different Mr. Johnson than me?
No, yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. I'm talking about Al Johnson, the representative of the developer. I did not realize that was your last name. My apologies, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Also, you're reading from your letter, which we received and we have read. So the question of the commission, do you want to continue to hear the letter being read, or we're up at 3 minutes? So
It's all right for him to put it in.
Okay.
I would like to hear the rest.
I'm okay with letting him continue.
me as well. Okay, let's continue then.
I appreciate that, gentlemen. Thank you. I didn't understand why the developer was given the opportunity to respond to public comment. In my opinion, it should have been the developer's job to persuade you that this is the correct project for this location. It should not have been the public's job to persuade you that this is not the proper use or the proper entitlements to grant that spot. I was very frustrated with that. You said you have my letter, so I'll stop there. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others? Yes, please come forward.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me speak. I appreciate it. I have a note in here because I get nervous and I forget things, including names.
Your name, please.
I am Sarah Silva. I live in Bianchi Estates. My house backs to Crowder, which is also where they're proposing an exit to be for the Baseline commercial project. That last meeting was really frustrating. We sat through over 2-hour meetings, two 2-hour meetings, almost 3-hour meetings with the MAC, and they voted unanimously against the project. And then to sit here and have so much public comment come in, and they were all naysayers for the project, all saying how it would negatively affect them. And I don't understand why then, and I know Mr. Herzog, you had questioned that, you had brought that up. The MAC unanimously said no, what's wrong with the project, what's going on? I feel like that was a great question, and that should have been the opportunity to then say, hey, maybe this needs a little more research, maybe this needs more discussion, behind closed doors with you guys, with the developer or whatnot. We all spent so much time calling in for those 2 MAC meetings and saying our piece, and then to then again have to call in for the Planning Commission meeting. I don't believe any of you guys had seen the meeting. I know it's all recorded. You could have gone back and listened and hopefully heard what we said, so we wouldn't have to spend almost another 4 hours talking about it. Going along those lines, Mr. Cannon was allowed to go off on the most tangent, and it was just, I feel like, a waste of time. He talked a lot about his agenda, his life work of bringing a gas station and a fast food restaurant to West Roseville, and I feel like he should have gently, nicely, whatever it would have taken, said, okay, that's enough of that, let's get back on topic, let's continue this in a more professional manner. For him to have represented, I would say everybody that called in was in his district. He's supposed to be representing us. And I felt like it was very disrespectful the way that he spoke about the project. It was very yes and absolutely yes, and I want this. The first person that came up to speak cried. She lives next to the tower, so her house, her windows face where all of that's going in, so she's very emotional about it. For him to have been giddy about the project and not taken somebody's feelings into account, I mean, we all feel very passionate, very upset about this. She's brought to tears. She did that at the MAC meeting, too. That was the first time I had ever heard of her, even though she's a couple doors down across the street. And I wanted to just go and hug her after that because I knew how upset she was. And for him to have just kind of tossed it aside was really frustrating. And I do believe that he owes her an apology. Her name is Robin Mitz. She lives next to the tower. I can provide an email, a phone number, an address. I'm not sure that's appropriate, but I know you can look it up if you want. But I do believe that he owes at least her an apology. And I would hope that he would just change the way that he's communicating about all this. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that I don't come across disrespectful or anything. I know you guys have a tough job. I know it's hard to listen to everybody, especially when it can be kind of an argumentative sort of thing. We're trying to be respectful about it and just show you that it's just not right. And at the very least, it needs to be reevaluated. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there others in the audience? Sue, is there anyone with a raised hand? All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
May I do some quick follow-up with council on this?
Yes.
Thank you. Just public disclosure, I received this letter actually earlier than most of you, I think, because it was provided by Supervisor Jones to me. She just happened to get a copy of it, I guess, and so it was sent to her earlier. So I read it and had more time to contemplate it than most of you probably, and so I've corresponded a little bit, claiming attorney-client privilege, I suppose, but I've corresponded with counsel on this, and so I have some questions for him regarding the note from Mr. and Mrs. Silva. And I do wish Sam was here. I'm really disappointed that he's not here today. But these are general questions for counsel, I think, and then a specific one at the end. Would you agree with the statement that due process involves letting people know what you are considering, providing them with an opportunity to have their say, sharing information that you are considering in making your decision, and then being open-minded, fair, and unbiased in your decision? That is virtually a direct quote from a manual that I received.
Yes, so a couple things there. I do think there is an obligation as a planning commissioner to be unbiased, to be impartial, to view each assignment or each project that comes forward in that manner. I think it's not necessarily a due process violation. There are certain, I guess, process requirements that are included as part of a hearing, but that impartiality requirement is it's an ethical obligation, and there is a bit of a distinction between an ethical obligation and a legal obligation. in many of the planning commission or treatises that you read, and probably the one that you referred to as well, the legal requirements set forth the minimum standard that must be met, and that's with respect to ethical conduct. Now, there is a requirement for ethical standards or an obligation or a duty that is beyond that, and that's just because something is legal doesn't mean it's also ethical. And I think that's an important distinction, because ethics is and can be kind of a bit of a gray area. I think for purposes of planning commissioner purposes, disclosure, impartiality, that is all an ethical obligation. But when you get to a legal requirement, and specifically legal requirements to recuse yourself or remove yourself from a decision, that depends a lot on the personal or financial obligations, or the financial or personal connections to that specific project. And a lot of times that is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And I would say the financial obligations are the stronger ones. There's a lot of case law that focuses on that. If you have a financial connection to it, if a commissioner is going to get a financial benefit from a decision, then there's a much stronger requirement there, and a stronger rule that is a conflict, and a legal conflict, and then you have to recuse yourself then. But when you get into this area of is it ethical, is it right, there is kind of a gray area there that is, well, it might be legal, might not be, quote, ethical.
Sure. Okay. Certainly understand that. This is another quote, and I have to, everybody knows I'm a new guy here. So I read the books, and now I'm trying to figure this out and walk my way through this process. We're all victims, I guess, of our background and our experiences in the past. And so, having served for a long time, in a position of public trust, hopefully, I did the best I could to be someone who paid attention, and specifically to ethics and things like that, as I know we all do, everybody here, because this is our reputation. And it's a reputation that also is reflects upon the planning staff and the county staff as well. And so we all have an obligation to do the best we can. I reviewed the 26 or 25 March meeting as well, watched it in its entirety as well. That's where a couple of these other questions come from. And I think this will be a pretty quick answer based on what you basically just said. But this is another quote from the manual that I received. Even if a commissioner does not have a legally binding conflict of interest on an issue, they should recuse themselves if they consider themselves to be biased due to a relationship with an interested party. Would you essentially agree with that from an ethical perspective?
Yes, I would agree with that. And I do think it is important to note here that this requirement or obligation or duty to recuse yourself, that is something that can be very fact-specific and depend on the circumstances. And to the extent there are questions on that, that's what our office is available for, to kind of vet those with you and kind of go through those. So if there are questions along those lines, happy to kind of walk through those.
Okay. If Mr. Silva or other representatives or members of the community were to have questions about ex parte communications or things of that nature as a result of the meeting on the 25th, they could ask for the county to explore public records under the Public Records Act. Is that a correct statement?
Yes. So any documents that are under the purview of the county, and that includes any communications on any of these projects, are all subject to the Public Records Act. And that does exclude any attorney-client communications and other items that are privileged, but any documents that are not privileged are certainly subject to a Public Records Act request and would be provided.
Okay. Final question, and this is for the chair and for EJ and for council, I think. Is there interest in having a legal workshop, or when? I don't think you've done one for quite some time here, perhaps for years. Would there be interest in having a legal workshop where you come in and talk to to all of us and also to the community if they want to attend on ethical aspects, legal aspects of being a commissioner, ex parte communications, things of that nature.
Yes, I'm happy to participate in that workshop and provide the workshop on those topics.
And
I know we
actually-
had mentioned a topic about
We
Brown
talked about the
Act
Brown
and
Act.
Public Records Act
Correct.
stuff, so.
So that all
happy to-
ties together.
Would
So-
you be willing to agree to do that,
Oh, yeah,
place it on the agenda?
Actually, we already talked that
Oh,
it's going to happen, so.
Oh, great.
Especially the Brown Act, because things
Yeah.
have changed with the Brown Act, and this ties into the Brown Act on the ethics, so.
okay, great, good.
Hopefully more interesting than the online course.
It is the law, so
Yeah.
no guarantees that it's quite entertaining, but yeah.
Well,
I'll do
thank
my
you.
best.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public comment for matters not on the agenda. We're going now move on to the consent agenda. Would any of the commissioners like a consent item removed? And I think there's only one, the minutes from the last meeting. Seeing none, is there anyone in the public who would like a consent item removed? And do we, no? Okay. So with that, I'll accept the motion for the consent agenda.
I motion we accept the consent agenda as written.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Roll call, please, Sue.
I have a first from Mr. Woodward, a second from Mr. DiMattei, so a vote for Mr. DiMattei, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Woodward?
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. We are moving on to our first timed item, the Placer County 2021 Housing Element Update General Plan Amendment. Members of the public may now raise their hands, press star 9 if you're calling in, to begin queuing in for public comment on this item, which will not begin until the item presentation is complete. Anne Marie Novity, Housing Specialist, will be presenting the item. Good morning.
And I'm looking for the clicker. So the item that we have before you is the 2021-2029 Housing Element Update. And before we get started, I wanted to introduce, this has been a team effort, not only with staff, but also with our consultant team. So we have with us today representatives from PlaceWorks. We have Jennifer Gastelum and Cynthia Walsh, and they've been our kind of co-project managers throughout this effort. We also have Pat Angel. He's from Ascent, and he's been on our environmental review team. On Zoom, we have Kim Untermoser, and she is also from Ascent, and Chelsea Payne from Ascent was unable to attend. As far as staff, Shauna Purvines has been our Deputy Director of CEDRA. We also have Devin McNally with us here, and then also on Zoom, we have Dr. Robert Oldham, our Director of Health and Human Services, in case we have some questions. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge everybody that's been working on this, and we're going to be doing kind of a tag team on the presentation. So this should be about maybe about a 25-minute presentation. During this time, we're going to be giving an overview of the housing element. We're going to go over the contents of the adoption draft that is before you. We're going to talk about the 2021-2029 Regional Housing Needs Allocation, otherwise known as RHNA. Then we're going to talk a little bit about our land inventory, the residential capacity, and the RHNA shortfall during this cycle. We'll touch on all the public outreach efforts and the themes that we've heard and the feedback throughout this process. And then we're going to go into the kind of the meat and potatoes of the actual housing element, which is Chapter 5, the goals, policies, and program summary. And then we're going to talk about our review with the state, which is the State Housing and Community Development Department review and that process, and the requested revisions that we've addressed. And then we'll talk about the required environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act
and our compliance with that. Then we're going to tell you where we're at in the project schedule, and then what staff is proposing for the Planning Commission's recommendation or consideration for us to take to the board. So now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Jennifer, and she will take it from here.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Ann. Jennifer Gasselm with PlaceWorks. Very excited to be here to get to this point. Let's see. Make sure I have the with the housing element. Oh, wrong way. Oh, it's upside down. I'll figure it out. Okay, so I know we have spoken with some of you previously and prior to getting conditional compliance for the state, the housing element, but just as a refresher, the housing element is one of the 7 mandated elements of the general plan. We are planning for an 8-year process that starts May 15th, 2021 and goes through May 15th, 2029. The housing element is a unique element in the fact that it has to be reviewed by the state, and that was a 60-day review process. And the plan is to take it to the board for adoption on prior to May 15th. I believe the date is May 11th for adoption. If the county, which we're not in that situation, was not to meet that date, there is a 120-day extension, which would take you out to September. But we've already gotten past that point, so we are moving it forward. The housing element has to address, as Anne-Marie mentioned, the regional housing needs allocation process, which I'll get a little bit more into what that means. And it is also unique in the fact that we look at existing needs as well as we project out for the next 8 years. So we did not change the format of the document. It is still includes an executive summary introduction. These bullets here include the layout of that document, and it is a hefty one of that. It includes the demographic information, which is the housing needs assessment, and then constraints. We look at what are governmental constraints regarding how much the cost is to build housing, how much land cost, and then we look at resources, land inventory, what land is currently available to allow for the development of housing at what densities. And then we include goals, policies, and programs for the next 8 years. And then there's the checks and balances. Prior to the goals, policies, and programs, we took a look at, it's a big matrix in the housing element called the evaluation of the previous programs. And that's where the county was able to talk about all the things that were accomplished in the last 8 years and which programs needed to be modified, which programs needed to be continued, and which programs were completed. Then there's a very extensive public outreach summary of all the outreach, and we'll touch a little bit about that. There's a glossary, and then one of the more recent state laws is AB 686, which has to do with affirmatively furthering fair housing. So there's a number, that's a tongue twister. Don't say that too many times fast, but there's a number of maps that are in the housing element that you can reference. So again, yes. So just to cover, this is a very similar slide here, but there are 7 goals. There are 58 policies, and 23 of them being new, and 49 programs, 28 of them being new. And the reason for that is the last bullet on this slide, which is that in the last 8 years, the state had a frenzy of new laws that were passed. So we had to do quite a bit of minor tweaks to your programs to get them up to state law. So for example, SB 35 has to do with streamlining affordable housing projects. So that is one of the more recent laws that we had to put in there. The state also kind of souped up 166, which is known at loss, and I'll talk a little bit further about that. But basically it's showing that there is a land inventory in the housing element, and we've identified multiple sites to allow for development of housing. The process for this is that if projects do come forward and you decide that there's a project that fits on this site but it doesn't meet the land inventory, that you have enough other sites to meet the inventory. So it's kind of, as I mentioned, this kind of surplus situation, so you're always meeting the intent of the law. So there's some additional teeth in that. I already spoke about the AB 686, which is affirmatively furthering fair housing. It has to do with fair housing policies. There's a program in there to beef that up. That was included. And 1397 is another one that I'll touch on. And what that one is about is there are jurisdictions across the state who identified land in their housing element that they've had land available for multiple rounds that has not actually developed. It is not the job of the county to develop these sites. You're not housing developers. It is the job of the county to facilitate, identify land at proper or at densities accordingly, specifically higher density, and to help facilitate the development through your programs and streamlining and helping development to occur. So what has happened over the years is that some jurisdictions will just use those same sites and actually not ever build anything on them and keep those in reserve to meet the RENA. And that's for not a county the size of yours. It would be for a smaller jurisdiction. The way the state saw that was that if you're continuing to include these sites, then we need to know a little bit more about the sites. We need to ensure there's development certainty, that you're just not holding on to these sites, that these sites could actually develop should a project come forward to you. So it just created a little bit more work on our end to ensure that the land that is there is available to be developed. This is the big horse that drives the whole housing element, is the regional housing needs allocation. And the state comes up with a number every 8 years for the amount of land, amount of units that they see that's going to actually need to be available should development occur over the next 8-year period. So this period, again, we're looking at is from through 2029 right now, this next 8-year period. And what SACOG's region, so the state comes up with a number, then it goes down to the COG level. In our case, SACOG region had 153,512 units. Just as a point of reference, the previous RENA for the 2013-2021 range was about 50,000 units less. So this 50,000 unit increase for SACOG is kind of a decent number. How that rolled down for the unincorporated county was this 7,400 units is about a 2,700 unit increase from your last RENA. So 2,700 is not as bad as the overall 50,000. So I would say that this is a good number to work through and be able to address. For the basin, that 435 was an increase of 107 units. So that is how it played out with the SACOG methodology for Placer County. The job of the housing element is then to identify enough land to meet all of these units, of these 7,800 units. So we work diligently with staff. And the way that we do that is for the very low and low income units, the state is looking at a multifamily density. So that's where we came up with, and the next slide will give this information. It's based on income level. So just as you're looking at what very low and all these things are, the area median income for Placer County is $86,300. So when we're looking at that very low income needing over 2,100 units, we're looking at a family that has an income of less than $43,000. So it's a multifamily product that would accommodate a family in that income category. So to do the land inventory, we have to pull all the tricks out of our bag to come up with multiple strategies to meet the land inventory. There's never a one-size-fits-all. So we first look at what projects are approved and what projects are planned. We build the case for the state. We say these are the things that are in the works and these are the things that are planned based on things that you've already reviewed. We look at what, based on the anticipated development patterns and of the specific plans, what's realistic to be able to count for this next 8-year period based on those specific plans. And then it gets a little trickier because we take the vacant land inventory, but then we also look at sites that are not necessarily vacant, meaning that they might have a barn on them, but they still have plenty of room for development to occur. So that's called a non-vacant site or an underutilized site. We also look at designations that allow residential and talk about what the actual potential of those are. And then 2 other categories where we count land is through accessory dwelling units. We look at how many ADUs, granny flats, in-law quarters, you're approving on a yearly basis, and we were able to project those numbers for the next 8 years of how many potential units you can count and accommodate through ADUs. The same for manufactured homes. So again, it required quite a few tricks in the bag to put all of these together to build the case. And then in the end, we were able to identify that there were enough sites, land zoned, and general plan designated accordingly to meet your above moderate, which is all your single family homes, and your moderate, which is more of a medium dense product. Where we fell short is in your lower income units. So we were short 1,107, just based on what is existing on the ground right now. There is not enough land that is zoned at a minimum of 20 units an acre to meet this number. So that's where we started. And so we have a program in the housing element. And the way the law is written is that if you don't have enough sites available, you put in a program that says, we're going to look at all areas, we're going to exhaust all options, and we have 3 years to identify land through a process where we will rezone to accommodate this. And one note on this is that your staff report is incorrect. It says it's 51.6 acres, and it's actually 55 acres of high density of minimum of 20 units an acre that needs to be identified over this next 3-year period. Also, there was a incorrect number. Again, we're working feverishly till the last hour to get this. So apologies of the staff report. And the number in your staff report says 34 acres, but it's actually 36.9 that a minimum density is increased to 30 units per acre to rezone to reduce it to 36. So the higher density you go, the less acres you can find. So it'll be a process that you're going to go through. We also need to provide a buffer when you're doing that, keeping that in mind that you want to have the most options for all sites in the county, and you want to be able to be in the driver's seat on what you want to approve. So that's why you want to make sure to have that buffer. So if something really great comes in that you want to approve, you don't want to be held or locked to a specific number because you want to be able to meet your RENA and do good projects. So the process for this is to identify that there are sites available. So we have gone to the state and said, look, the county is going to go through this process to identify additional sites to meet this RENA over the next 3-year period. So you have to do that in the next 3 years. From what I understand is that on day 1 of year 3, you'll get a letter from the state if you haven't already reported that you've done it, and they'll ask what the status is. And now they have policing power to take away your compliance, which is obviously not the goal. So county staff will be coming back to you through that process to make sure, looking at infill sites, looking at infrastructure, or a couple things for the candidate sites to rezone. In some of the cases, you'll see in the document that it's literally an increase from 20 units to 30 units an acre in some cases where you've already allowed for housing. So it would just be a density increase. So some of those are lower hanging fruit that will get you there a little bit easier. Public outreach efforts. So we've done a ton of public outreach. It was interesting. We started this process right at the beginning of the pandemic. So switching over to Zoom was a learning curve for all of us. However, the first meeting, just to reference, was we had 180 residents in the county and advocates and register for the meeting, and we had over 100 people attend that first public workshop. So we thought that the outreach went really well. The county does the flash vote text email survey, and we thought that was such a cool program that we pitched it to the state, and the state had Shauna come on and be part of their virtual outreach and talked about opportunities. So you were very well highlighted. It was a meeting attended by 500 planners across the whole state where the county was highlighted of, you guys do this amazing flash vote where you get such good feedback from residents. So in addition to the virtual workshops, we also did stakeholder hearings and a survey to make sure that we exhausted all the opportunities to get input from your residents and advocates about what's happening in Placer County. And this slide has a lot of words on it, but this talks about all the themes that we heard, which is, you know, as experts in the field of Placer County, you guys know some of these things. Talked about long-term effects of the pandemic. One of the big things that we saw out of this was transitional supportive housing on church-owned sites, which was great. We want more, you know, affordable housing options, just job housing balance with environmental. So it's a lot of things to try to balance here in the housing element. And I think that the programs you have in front of you address a lot of these issues and concerns, and it's a really good path moving forward for the next 8 years. And there's a list of all the public comment received in Appendix C. Staff has been very, very, very diligent about keeping track of all of it, so we very much appreciate Anne-Marie and all of her help with all that, because it was a lot. This is just an overview of the goals, policies, and programs, as I kind of already talked about. Innovative housing types is the new goal. So these are all the categories. The only one is the new one there, but as I mentioned, these are all minor tweaks and modifications to meet new state laws. And I'm going to pass it off to Cynthia. She's going to talk about the HCD review process. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, Jenny, just one question.
Yeah.
For the income level of $40,000 or $43,000, what is the rent that is anticipated or should be achieved for that income category? Just kind of curious.
It's in the document. We do have a whole table. I don't have that in front of me, but just if you do the math on it really fast, it's just without looking at like a utility allowance. If you took the $43,150 and the state looks at using 1/3.
All right.
So it would be like 1/3 of that divided by 12 would be what your monthly rent is. So that's how we do it. For mortgages, there's mortgage calculators. So we say like you can afford 3 times your income, but we put it into a mortgage calculator. So there's kind of a long information in that in the document.
Okay, so you use a 1/3.
Yes.
I know for houses now, some people go a little bit higher than 1/3. So okay.
It's a conservative estimate for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. 1,075. Cynthia just did the math. So a rent, and then we include in the document what rents were when we did a survey to show you, is there any options for a family of 4 people, what $1,000 looks like a month, which there's not a lot of options. So anything else before I pass off on the HCD review process? Okay, thank you.
Right, good afternoon, Cynthia Walsh with PlaceWorks. So after we have gone through the entire process Jenny just talked about, we go through the HCD review process. Once the public review draft is available, that is submitted to the state HCD for a 60-day time frame. So we did that in December, on December 22nd. So after the 60 days, about 45 days in, we have our first call with HCD, and we kind of discuss with them any of their initial concerns, comments. and we had a conference call with them in late January. We were able to submit some revisions to address the items that they had questions, clarification on. And then we did receive a conditional compliance letter in February, which means that we have met all the statutory requirements if this document is adopted as is. So you do have a copy of all of these revisions in your staff report, but just to go through these were the revisions that HCD, that we worked with them on. So Program 1, this was the rezone to meet the RENA, and this was putting an emphasis on rezoning sites that were between 0.5 and 10 acres. So 1397, SB 1397, that is where they want additional requirements if the site is smaller than a half of an acre or larger than 10. So we're going to focus our rezone efforts between that acreage.
Can I ask you a question right here?
Definitely.
And this is just for context, basically. The word high resource and medium resource and low resource, what's the definition of those in this context?
High resource is you have access to grocery stores and great schools, and medium is going to be a little bit less, and lower is going to be even and smaller than that.
Okay.
So things like that, yeah.
Yeah. I was just looking at the words and would interpret them differently.
Definitely, no, that's a good question. Looking at Program 4, there were zoning standards that were included. This was a new program to allow multifamily developments in the multifamily mixed use and commercial districts. This allows for additional capacity to meet the RENA. Looking at Program 5, we added in language to clarify that the county would establish a written policy for the SB 35 streamlining process. Program 6, this was also a new program. This is so the county will review and update subdivision standards to reflect best practices to reduce barriers to development. And that's an AB 686 item there, the fair housing, sorry. Program 9, this was, language was added to expand public water and sewer capacity and looking at candidate sites for rezoning resource areas that had the adequate services. Program 10, this was also around infrastructure improvements, and this was a new program to adopt policies and procedures to grant priority to projects that are meeting your lower income RENA. Program 15, this is added language that is supporting affordable housing development for special needs groups in support with the Alto Regional Center. Program 27, we added language to focus on promoting ADUs. We are relying on ADUs, projecting those out to meet a portion of the RENA, so this is just strengthening that, as well as the next two programs also are around strengthening our ADU assumptions. Program 34, this was looking at allowing for residential on religious properties, and this is something that the county is going to consider. Looking at establishing possibly an overlay zone, a combining zone, or a floating zone that would allow for development on religious property or safe parking, things like that. Group homes, this was a new program that was added to address fair housing and really just identifying the definition of family when you're looking at the size of a care facility. So this was to treat care facilities as other family homes are treated. Reasonable accommodations, Program 44, this language included, we added language to address approval findings to ensure that they are consistent with state law. And then as you can see, AB 686 was a huge undertaking for this document. So all of these programs now include fair housing as a part of them. I'm going to save you my voice and have to read all of those. Okay, so beyond the programs and policies, we did make documents to the background report. So we expanded on the affirmatively furthering fair housing, discussing displacement risks, impacts on the disabled community members, contributing factors, patterns of new growth. We also added a discussion on the short-term rental ordinance, just to look at that as a possible constraint and analyze it in the document. Quantified objectives, these are the objectives. So the county has a RENA allocation that you need to plan for, but then your quantified objectives is what you think based off your programs can actually develop within the time frame, the 8-year time frame. So we revise those based on the different programs called out there. We also clarified development standards, including heights and the relationship between the community plans and zoning. We highlighted consistency with the Employee Housing Act in regards to farm workers, ensuring that they are being treated compliant with state law. We added a discussion to discuss water and sewer availability, limitations. That was also strengthened with the programs that we included. We did have a few staff recommendations for the housing element. We included a new policy regarding the airport land use compatibility to require residential projects to comply with the compatibility plan. We also revised Program 49 to analyze potential tenant protections, which would assist with displacement, also a fair housing item. I'm going to pass this over to Pat. Thank you.
Good morning, Commission. Again, Pat Angel from Ascent Environmental. So the environmental analysis associated with the housing element update looks at the what changes are being made to the housing element. The previous housing element had a negative declaration that was prepared. So the environmental analysis that was done here was, as you change and update the housing element, do we start to trigger new impacts that the previous negative declaration didn't look at, or is there a substantial increase in severity in those environmental effects that were previously identified that need to be further evaluated here? So the environmental document that was prepared was an addendum and was provided in the material. The conclusions of the addendum identify and go through each environmental issue area and concludes that there are no increased severity of environmental effects and no new environmental effects. In fact, since 2013, there have been new county regulations that further address environmental issues. There's the sustainability plan that goes further than was something that was identified in 2013, as well as the Western Placer County HCP. So those were factored into the analysis and determined that the addendum was adequate and there was no need for further environmental review and no further environmental impacts would occur. So with that, I will turn it back to Ann.
I have a question about that, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
When you're changing densities and thinking about adding, number of units and the period of acres, with the new hazard impacts and how those are overlaid with our environmental review, is still determined that hasn't changed?
Well, the important thing, that's a good question, Commissioner. The important thing to realize is with the housing element itself, it doesn't propose any direct rezones or changes to your standards. It set forth later actions that would look at that, and those would be subject to environmental review. But adoption of the housing element itself doesn't trigger those things to happen. It doesn't entitle any sort of development. The addendum does go through the exercise of saying that as future development comes in, here's the various standards such as wildfires, such as other hazards such as geology and soils, that these projects have to comply with.
Yeah, okay.
And you're up.
So now I'm just going to give a kind of a recap of the whole project schedule. So just looking back at last year, around February through October was when we were working on developing the draft housing element. We mentioned earlier that we conducted 2 virtual community workshops in July and November of last year. We also held 2 stakeholder meetings in August and September. And then the first public review draft was released for public review on October 30th. And then during that time that folks were able to review it, both agency and the public, we held 2 workshops, one with the Planning Commission in November, and then the other one was in December with the board. And then, as Cynthia had mentioned, after that time, we did make some tweaks based on the feedback we had received. And so we submitted to HCD, to the state, on December 22nd, the actual revised draft element for their 60-day review. And as Cynthia also mentioned, after having a conference call with HCD staff and some back and forth revisions, we received a conditional compliance letter from HCD on February 18th. That is really a big deal to get that. And so And Pat mentioned that during this time, Ascent was working on preparing the environmental document, and that was finalized just before this meeting. So that is the document that is before you today. And so where we're at in the process, these are now the adoption hearings before we take it to the board. And so this is the first hearing with the Planning Commission. And so we'll be taking your recommendations forward on May 11th to the board. And then after the board makes their consideration and recommendations, our goal is to submit the adoption draft to HCD by that May 15th deadline. So we're really on schedule to make that deadline. And then after that, HCD actually has another up to 90 days to do their final review and then certify our document. So what staff has presented to you, and this is in the staff report, is this is what the Community Resource Development Agency is asking the Planning Commission is to forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to take the following actions. One would be to adopt the addendum to the Placer County Housing Element Update 2013 to 2021 Negative Declaration, and that's pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, and that's attachment A to the staff report. And then 2 would be to adopt a resolution amending the general plan by adopting the 2021 Housing Element Update, and that is attachment B to the staff report. So this concludes our presentation, and so now this is the time for additional questions or comments, either from you or then opening it up to the public. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So at this time, Commission, I'm sure, so there you go, Rich.
I have a question. You're going to go from 20 units to 30 units, or you're going to decrease the square footage per unit, so you're going to put more people in a smaller facility? Is there a square footage minimum that has to be recognized? Because you're not going to fit it all in 43,000 square feet, unless you're going to stack them on top of each other.
Shauna Purvines, Deputy Director of the Community Environmental Resource Agency. So just to make sure I understand your question, going from 20 units to 30 units per acre?
Correct.
It still would depend on the project itself. So it does provide for more flexibility of a different size of units, but generally there's still some level of a mix. So you might have some more 1 bedrooms versus 2 or 3 bedrooms.
That was
type
my
thing.
next question.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Rich.
Okay, Shauna, yeah, I might have a couple questions here. You know, a few meetings back, we reviewed a housing code draft document, and that included some maps. And this project includes maps, and they are different. And so I guess maybe you could explain difference in context between the code that we're looking at as well as the elements that we're looking at.
Sure. So the maps that you're seeing, well, there's a lot of maps in the housing element update. So the maps that are related to the housing inventory site, so those are the parcels that we've identified to meet the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, are generally looking at those parcels that have been kind of felt to be the best to meet that requirement under state law. There's also the additional maps that are on the back regarding the affirmative fair housing, which identifies those resource areas as the low, medium, and high. So those are the maps that are in there. In the code update, those are really focused in on both commercial and multifamily and design standards related to mixed-use development and multifamily. So the commercial sites could be probably commercial sites, you're going to see more of those on the maps under the code than you would under this housing element. This is primarily looking at residential sites.
And so the code will be changing the zoning, or
it
this
is.
document will
So
not?
that is the difference, and that's what we were speaking to about the difference between a housing element update, which is setting the policies, but does not necessarily actually change the densities or change the zoning or the code. The proposed housing code amendments is that package of code amendments. It actually does come in and consider revisions to the code, and very well will have the opportunity to change densities, or actually the code doesn't actually propose densities, but it does change design standards, setbacks, height limits, coverage, and those types of things that can better accommodate some of these types of development.
Okay, and so I want to drill down on one of the maps a little bit just to get better understanding, but I do have a question. There's a discussion in there about the different levels of income and developments that are required to have 10% for the lowest income, but then it also goes up to 40% for some of the other income levels, it sounds like. And so what's the difference there between the 10 and the 40, and where does that come into play?
I believe you're referencing the 10% requirement for inclusionary housing for certain developments in the county. So say our specific plans, when we adopt a specific plan, it's required to accommodate 10% affordable, but that affordable range is the low, very low, and moderate. And then that 10% is further broken down, 40% for very low, 40%.
Oh, okay.
So of the 10%. So
That's
I think
of the
that's where
10%.
we're seeing the difference. Yeah.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. Sorry, I missed
No,
that.
no problem.
Okay, and then, let me see, one of the things I noticed on, like, the map that shows the Auburn area, and you could look at each one of these maps and kind of scratch your head a little bit in some places, as well as the one in Forest Hill. I noticed that there's a high density, I guess, or maybe it's high density residential that's, it looks like it's maybe 2 miles north of town. And so I guess the question that comes up when you see that is, you know, in order for that really to develop, it's going to take a tremendous amount of infrastructure to get sewer and water and road access to Highway 49. And so I guess I'm kind of wondering.
How did we get to some of those sites? Is that?
Yeah, and then like in Forest Hill, it does mention, like the PUD is in charge of the sewers in Forest Hill, but they're not, because it's all septic in Forest Hill.
Yeah, most
And
of
so,
it, yeah.
So when you start looking at drilling down on these individual parcels in terms of infrastructure, I guess what I'm questioning is, where some of the realistic ability to achieve that really identified or not?
Yeah, so as Jennifer kind of mentioned, we started with the community plans. We started with those community plans where the communities themselves identified where they wanted their higher density residential, and those are already adopted maps. So this, again, doesn't change any of those maps or doesn't change the densities that are allowed, the housing element itself. So that was an area where it was identified to accommodate higher density residential, and that's part of the Forest Hill Community Plan. In most of our rural areas, you are going to find that they are going to be challenged with their infrastructure to be able to meet those upper end densities. But they still may be able to meet their lower end densities with other types of sewer or septic or some other facilities that they could be able to do. So it's still a viable site. It may not build out in this housing element cycle, but it is a site that could accommodate. And that's really what we're looking for, is which sites have the potential to accommodate housing in this next 8 years.
Okay, so probably it's best in the high resource areas, what you're talking about, right?
And that's definitely, where you have your schools, your jobs, your grocery stores, transit, which is generally where you'll see those higher resource areas.
Existing infrastructure or close by.
Exactly, yep.
Okay, I think that answers my questions for now. Thank you.
Shauna, we have a couple of new commission members, and they probably are not aware of some of the state laws, and it kind of goes to Mr. DeMartini's question. If you could just kind of explain, the state allows increased height, reduced setbacks, whatever, to accommodate some of the affordable housing, just briefly.
Sure. So again, as Jennifer mentioned, we've had a flurry of housing law changes over the last, I'm going to say they've been pretty concentrated from about 2016 on, or 2017 is when we started to see them. And many of those went to laws that include, like, the Affordable Housing Density Bonus Law, which local jurisdictions require to be found consistent with the state law. And those allow for, depending on your affordability level in your project, if you add, just as an example, 5% very low income to your project. So if you had a 100-unit project and you said 5 of those units are going to be very low, you can get up to a 35% density on that, and that's an automatic allowance for density under the state law. And then more recently, in this last year, they kind of oomphed up that very law itself and added even height limits and some of the coverage and those types of things. So those are laws that are just offered to the developer that's coming in, and local jurisdictions are required to meet the obligations of those laws.
Thank you. Other questions? Go ahead.
Okay, just a couple. Excellent briefing, as usual, so appreciate that, and very much appreciate the discussion about the EIRs, because that mystified me, frankly. Between these two documents, I was completely confused by that, so I appreciate that. This is, I think, a question for council, actually. So if we approve this today, can staff still make changes, generally minor changes, but changes between now and when it goes before the supervisors? Or is it a lock as a document?
So today's approval would be a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. So that recommendation needs to be taken to the Board of Supervisors as is.
As written.
You can certainly request changes in the recommendation, and
Okay.
I would say there may be some latitude if they need to tweak a word, as long as it's not a substantive change.
Yeah. Okay, well, the reason I ask that is because I have a MAC member who is fabulous, frankly, and she has dissected this thing in ways that I honestly would never have been able to do. And so there are, I think, some valuable comments in what she has provided me here, that might be useful to have a discussion with staff on. The MAC meeting last night, I understand, was it didn't quite get to where at least she would desire in terms of an understanding between her views and perhaps staff's views. So if there were a way to accommodate a discussion between her and staff in an effort to make the document perhaps a little more clear, I would appreciate it. I don't know if there is.
Yeah, so this will go to the board, and the board certainly has the discretion to modify this as needed. So to the extent that there are comments or questions or suggested changes, the board, when it reviews the Planning Commission's recommendation, can include those changes. Okay. And certainly if there were requested changes, staff could present those as well if they were supportive of them to the board, along with the Planning Commission recommendation.
That's probably a good way to approach it. Okay. Can anyone tell me approximately how many planned units there are in Granite Bay under this element?
How many units have been identified to
Correct.
accommodate? Okay. So under the RENA, there's been, under Granite Bay, there's 108 units that have been identified for the moderate income category.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, for public disclosure, we've had conversations on this, and also I talked with Anne Marie a little bit about that. I just wanted that, out there for the public record. I would like an explanation, and this is curious to me, and it was addressed as well. But we talk about, I guess it's senior living facilities or memory care facilities with in excess of 7 residents, right? So I live in a community right now that's been around since 1997, and it's got 4 or 5 vacant lots in it and about 150 homes. So under this provision, are you authorizing an individual to come in, purchase that property, and put in a memory care facility smack dab in the middle of a residential community that's been around since 1997, and somebody who has a vacant lot on 3, they're surrounded by people who have been living there since 1997, and they could put a memory care facility in the middle of that? Is that what could happen here?
No, not directly from the housing element update. The housing element update does have a program that identifies the requirement to meet the public health and safety code, and there, under the public health and safety code, there are requirements for the 6 or less or the 7 or more, and along with many of the other state laws, that one does continue to get tweaked. So we will be obligated to bring our code consistent with the public health and safety code on that. I don't believe it's quite that cut and dry, but we can definitely, look into that. But we would need to bring back an item to update our zoning code, identifying how we're bringing it consistent with the state code, and then that will determine, what is allowed.
Okay, so that language is based in law.
It's based in law.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just like to add too, when it comes to care facilities, there's different state licensing requirements depending on the type of care that's being provided. So if you have memory care, it would be different from a residential care. There are a lot of different levels and tiers on the state level for those kinds of licensing and requirements.
Okay. Okay. Certainly, probably a well-intended law that may have some unintended consequences that aren't, but nonetheless. I think that is sufficient for now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other commissioner comments or questions? If not, let's begin now. Time for the public comment period. So we'll start with persons here in the audience who would like to make comment. 3 minutes. Please come forward to the podium. State your name.
I just stuck around. Hi, I'm Sarah Silva. I just stuck around because I found this interesting, so I may be totally out of my element here, but it's really neat to hear about the plans and how this comes to fruit. I've heard about tiny houses, and I know that TV shows have kind of not given us the accurate thing, but on a rural or from the rural standpoint, could that be kind of a bridge, or has that been considered? I don't know if that would help out with low income versus medium income, but I know that nutrition health has been a hot topic. I know that's been a big thing with homeless things or homeless situations and schools and stuff. And so I don't know if the tiny home thing could kind of give people this boost where they are even taught to live off the land, given, the opportunity to have a house that actually has some property they can use rather than the footprint of the house taking up, such a majority of the house. I'm just curious to see if that was something that has ever been brought up or if you've done any research. Anyway, that was my piece. Thank you.
Okay, Shauna, after we're done with public comments, if you could talk about that. I was telling Shauna, after the public comments are done, then she can explain what the county's been doing about tiny houses and accessory dwelling units, also known as granny flats. So, okay. Others in the audience who would like to speak? Seeing none, do we have anyone online? No one online. So with that, we'll close the public comment period. And Shauna, if you could answer those questions.
Absolutely. So as we've talked about, there's two different kind of projects going forward right now. There's this policy document, which is the housing element under the general plan. And then concurrently, there's a package of housing code amendments, which is to our zoning code that has a number of different things in it. One of those is tiny homes, and that was actually at the recommendation of the Board of Supervisors to include or consider tiny homes as a mix of housing types, which is a goal and objective of the county. So just to be clear, tiny homes are generally anything that's about 400 square feet or less. That's what they're qualified for. If they're just built and or on a foundation or on a slab, that is just considered a small home. It's not what you would think tiny home. Tiny homes generally mean tiny homes that are on wheels, ones that actually, can be moved around. So tiny homes on foundations, those are currently allowed under the county code already. Because we don't have a minimum unit size. We're just subject to the minimum unit size under this California building code. But a tiny home on wheels is being considered under both kind of independent and as part of tiny home communities, or use some of those as part of the code amendment, which will be coming later this year.
All right. Thank you. Other questions of the staff? Nathan, did you? Or Dan? No? All right. All right. With that, it's time for the commission to have discussion, and after discussion, a motion. So any discussion on the part of the commission?
I'm still puzzling a little bit over the highest resource, high resource, and moderate resource. And I'm looking at the map, and the highly agricultural western part of the county shows as the highest, resource. And I could look further, I think up close to Sheridan. To the west of Sheridan is in the highest resource.
So I might be able to help clarify that a little bit. So under the California State Tax or Treasurer's Office, that's where what you might refer to as the 4% or 9% tax credits come forward through for affordable housing projects. It was through their office that they identified this concept of the low, medium, and high. And so I'm happy to send that over to you. There is an entire methodology that goes behind how they determine what is low, medium, high. That's not something that we determined. That is something that we took directly from the state.
Okay, so it really gets way beyond just infrastructure that's available.
Absolutely. Yeah, it goes there's a very lengthy methodology that goes into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll get that. I can send you that link.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess you can. I guess you kind of answered my question because I have been puzzling what that really means. And so
Yeah. Yep.
I probably still don't know all the details that you can provide, but at any rate, I appreciate that. Thank
No
you.
problem.
All right, other discussion on the part of the commission? Okay. Just kind of my response, first of all, well done, Shauna. You have been going through over some time looking at this. I think the policies are good. I think we will have opportunities as further zoning code changes come forward to look at the true impacts of some of those decisions. Good job on the environmental document. I think it's clear, and I would agree with you that the addendum serves that well. So those are my comments. I think it's a good document, and I think the county's poised to move forward in a positive way. Okay, I'll accept the motion.
Well, at any rate, I just wanted to comment too that the level of detail in here is amazing. In fact, for a person like me, it's overwhelming. But at any rate, I do appreciate the work that went into this for that purpose. Thank you.
I guess. Thank you, Jenny. Just so you know, Jenny grew up across from me, so I've known Jenny for a long time. Okay, motion?
Chairman, I'd like to motion that we send a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that we adopt the addendum to Placer County Housing Element Update 2013 to 2021 negative declaration pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA Attachment A.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Roll call, please.
Yes, the first from Mr. Herzog, a second from Mr. Woodward. So vote for Mr. DiMattei, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I would like to make the comment that understandably that a lot of people will see a lot of detail here that they might view as a problem. But what I'm recognizing is this is basically to meet state law.
Right.
And so that's really what we're doing. And so a lot of this has already been codified by the state of California. So I say yes.
Thank you. Mr. Woodward?
Yes, with just another comment, which is that I would appreciate staff's taking an opportunity to talk a little further with MAC member and kind of go through some of these specifics. I think it will help with understanding the community. But yes.
Thank you. Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd like to further move that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors that we adopt a resolution amending the general plan by adopting the 2021 Housing Element Update Attachment B.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Roll call, please.
That was a first from Mr. Herzog, a second from Mr. Woodward. So a vote from Mr. DiMattei, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Woodward?
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay. With that, we're going on to the next timed item is the Eureka Grove, also known as the Greyhawk 3, vesting tentative subdivision map and conditional use permit modification. Members of the public may now raise their hands and press star 9 if you're calling to begin queuing in for public comment on the item, which will not begin until the item presentation is complete. Chris Schmidt is supervising planner, will be presenting the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Schmidt, the Planning Services Division. The item before you this morning is a request from engineering firm Morton and Patello on behalf of the New Home Company to modify an existing approved project in the Granite Bay area. The project is located at the northeast corner of Eureka Road and Sierra College Boulevard, not far from Douglas Boulevard. To the south of the project site is City of Roseville. There's a commercial plaza and a residential neighborhood. A kitty corner to the site is also City of Roseville, residential single family. West of the site, City of Roseville as well. North of the site is office buildings and the Greyhawk 2 subdivision, and beyond that, an office park and retail as you get closer to Douglas Boulevard. And east of the site is the existing Greyhawk neighborhood. Project site is a little over 20.5 acres. The site does have split zoning. On the west is commercial plan development. That portion's 9 acres. And the eastern portion is residential single family. Minimum building site of 18,000 square feet with a planned residential development of 2.8 units per acre. So as you can see in the photos here, construction is well underway. These photos are probably about a month old. This is looking at the project site from Sierra College Boulevard looking east. And then this is looking across the project site from the Greyhawk neighborhood looking west. So this project was originally approved in 2016 with 44 half-plex units on the commercially zoned portion of the property. So those are 22 buildings with 2 units each. They're all 2-story. And then 28 detached units on the eastern portion. So a little timeline here for you. This project was reviewed by the Planning Commission in April of 2016. Due to the rezoning request on the eastern portion of the site, it needed to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. That happened on June 7th, 2016. The previous owner needed an extension of time to continue marketing the site. So the deadline for that, the expiration date for that was late last year, or actually earlier this year, I should say. The project was renamed from Greyhawk 3 to Eureka Grove early last year, April. The final map for the project, the Greyhawk 3 project, recorded September 9th of last year, and the New Home Company purchased the site on October 6th last fall, and work started shortly thereafter. So the proposed plan is, just like the previous plan, 44 half-plex units and 28 detached units. The layout of the homes, the orientation, nothing has changed. These are the plans New Home Company is proposing. These are the half-plex units on the western portion. They have 2 floor plans. This plan 1 is 2,200 square feet or 3 or 4 bedrooms. Plan 2, a little bit larger, 2,500 square feet of 4 bedrooms. Not much change happening on the western portion of the site, but there is one minor change we'll go over. So on the detached portion of the site on the east, 2 floor plans offered. All the plans are single story, 2,300 square foot plan 1 with 3 or 4 bedrooms, and a slightly larger plan 2 with 2,500 square feet, also with 3 or 4 bedroom options. So the big change driving the request today is accessory dwelling units. So the previous item before me laid the groundwork of the desire and the need for different types of housing types in the county. So New Home Company has heard the call. They believe there's a market for ADUs. They're willing to build them. The first production builder in the county that actually offered these as a floor plan. Let me note, unincorporated county, Lennar and JMC Homes do offer multi-generational home floor plans in Roseville and Lincoln and Rockland. So it's not the first, but it'll be a first for us. So a lot of benefits to having these ADUs built up front or even later on. Helps us meet arena numbers. Also is a nice option for families. So what are ADUs used for? homeowners in fixed income need additional rental income. In this case, what we think and New Home Company believes, it's really going to be for boomerang kids or failure to launch kids, also known as aging relatives. Instead of sending your parents to a nursing home, can maybe live with you, but not with you. You have a detached unit that they would occupy. So just as a note that this is a trend that is increasing in America. 20% of Americans now live in multi-generational households, and it's only expected to increase as the baby boom generation ages. So here's the Plan 1 for the New Home Company. The main unit, 2,500 square feet. And they're proposing a 365 square foot, one bedroom ADU as standard. So this is the base floor plan. A buyer can opt out of having the ADU. In this ADU in the upper corner, that space would just become a den or an office. Plan 2, 2,500 square feet, main unit. The option is for a 302 square foot studio unit on the back of the house. So these are not internally connected. There would be external access from the side of the house. And of course, the ADUs have small kitchen facilities and a full bathroom and sleeping and living quarters. So this would be an option for buyers to choose if they want to do this on the Plan 2. But here's where the rub is. So the Greyhawk 3 project was originally approved. They modeled it after the Greyhawk 2 neighborhood to the north. So detached, single-story homes, maintenance-free lifestyle. The units are built in building envelopes, and everything outside of that is HOA owned and maintained. Every buyer got a private use yard easement in the rear, typically 20 feet deep, 60 feet wide. So you see that area in blue. It's owned by the HOA, but a homeowner can put in patios, small pool, hot tub, gazebos, play structure, landscaping, walls on the edges, whatever they wanted to do. It's basically theirs, but they don't own it. The New Home Company, the ADUs would stick into that private yard easement. So on Plan 1 on the left, 203 square feet would be in the private yard easement. And then for the studio unit, 306 square feet. So the whole unit would be in that ADU area or in the private yard easement area. And since the home buyer would not own it, you couldn't do this. So what New Home Company is proposing is to remove the private yard easements on the back of each of those residences. And that you see there, that's proposed modification, remove the PYEs to allow the construction of the ADUs within the lot. Development standards would change accordingly. And then on the western portion where the half plexes are, one thing we overlooked when the first map recorded was putting on private utility or public utility easements between the units to provide access to utility boxes because they share a common property line and the utilities would be on one side, so the neighbor needs access for that utility box. And this shows the approved project for the Greyhawk in the upper left, shows the private yard easement, flashing in blue, adding the public utility easement on the attached product. And then the private yard easement goes away. It becomes the new building envelope or lot for the detached homes. This shows the tentative map changes. It's a mapping exercise. Those red lines show where those private yard easements go away. Sure.
So with the Greyhawk community that's to the east there, which two of these plots, I guess, residences, are closest to the Greyhawk?
So 6 through 10.
Right.
Basically back up to the Greyhawk neighborhood over here on the east.
Is it 8 and 9 or is it 9 and 10? And you'll understand why I'm asking.
It's 9 and 10.
9 and 10.
The home is right here. It's got a pretty small setback in the existing neighborhood. these homes here, there's two homes here, they have a larger setback from the common boundary.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So the development standards are in the conditional use permit. It lays out setbacks and other minutia for the project, and this shows the changes. So the maximum area on the detached product, since we're getting rid of the PYEs, that bumps up to 6,162. It's the largest building envelope lot on the eastern portion. The lot depth, we lose that 20 feet PYE, so it goes 65 to 85. And then we list the permitted uses within the envelopes, which were previously listed in the private yard or private use easements. So hardscape, patio furnishings, landscaping trellises, etc. With the PYEs going away, building envelope setbacks from the neighboring property line on the east was 22 feet previously. With bumping out their building envelope, it's now 10 feet. So between the proposed new building envelope and the common boundary with the White Hawk neighborhood or the Gray Hawk neighborhood is 10 feet of HOA land. So there's a 10-foot buffer between our proposed lots and the existing development. Patio envelope, private use yard definition goes away. We do add allowance for 4 feet of walkway along the side of the house, which could extend into the HOA maintained area to provide access to the new ADUs if they're built and the backyards. And we did add a minimum rear yard use area requirement of 770 square feet. So this would cap what new home company and a future buyer could build in what was the former PYU private yard easement areas. So with this 770 square feet, it allows new home company to build that studio unit of over 300, a little over 300 square feet. And basically that's it. So it couldn't go larger unless they wanted to go to 2 stories. Parking was raised as an issue. Is the site going to be adequately parked if up to 28 ADUs are built? And there's plenty of parking here based on our standard. Each of the floor plans offers 3-car garages, and each has a driveway for at least 2 cars. Some of the lots, like lot 11, lot 10, have room for 3 or 4 cars. There's also guest parking bays. You can see in here in purple. So a minimum of 5 parking spots per unit. So staff believes it would be adequately parked. A question came up of if private yard easements go away, which was HOA land, does it mess up our PD calculations for that eastern portion? And when this project was originally approved, we didn't consider the PYEs as common area or open space because it was going to be developed with hardscape or whatever. So the PD, nothing changes with the PDs. After the project started construction, I did get a couple calls from residents of the Gray Hawk neighborhood asking about the trail network and whether it was public and could they change that to no public access. So I'll just lay out the accessibility plan. There is a meandering trail along Eureka Road, sidewalks internal to the site and also along Sierra College. And then this is the Miners Ravine, or Strap Ravine public trail that's proposed through the project site. So it does connect over here to the Gray Hawk neighborhood, and that's a public trail that heads east along the creek, eventually would connect to the White Hawk 1 project if it gets built with a connection up to Douglas Boulevard. So there will be a network of public trails throughout. Originally, the Greater Bay Community Plan called for a public trail along the creek out to Sierra College. There is some Army Corps easements and some wetlands here, so the trail cannot get up into this space. So we brought it down to Eureka Road. It's also part of the Dry Creek Greenway plan. So a public trail on this site has been on the books for quite a long time. And then an internal pathway for residents on the eastern portion. So we did look at the impact of traffic for the new 28 ADUs. The assessment was prepared based on the modified project using the county's VMT tool. The assessment concluded that the project site has an average VMT per resident of 18.83, which is below the adopted threshold of 26.39 vehicles miles traveled per resident. The Granite Bay site is also in a low VMT area. It would result in a VMT rate less than the adopted threshold. Therefore, both the approved and the modified project have a less than significant impact for VMT. Recall that VMT is a new standard we use in CEQA, and no additional traffic mitigation measures are required. As you've probably seen out in the lobby and may have heard, once construction started, the new home company did run into a good amount of petrified wood. You can see it here gathered on site. There was a paleontologist on site during excavations for at least the first couple weeks, and there was so much found that the paleo expert deemed that it's a neat resource, but it's not historic or especially treasured. I don't know what the proper term is, but it's not something that we need to gather every piece. So what they did was say, if you find more, move it if you want, or just leave it buried. A whole bunch was collected. It was sent to designated repositories, mostly colleges and community colleges. Placer County Division of Museums has a chunk. This, what you see out in our lobby, was found on the site when Eureka Road was widened a few years ago. Granite Bay High School has some pieces, and also the Granite Bay Library. And the new home company is going to put some of this in the park area on the site with also some interpretive signage. It'll be along the public pathway. So on CEQA review, we did do an addendum to the 2016 initial study, MND, and a supplemental analysis was done and concluded that the proposed new map and the modification do not result in any new significant impacts not previously disclosed in the MND, nor would it result in a substantial increase in the magnitude of any significant environmental impact previously identified in the initial study in MND from 2016. And with that, staff does recommend you adopt the addendum to the 2016 mitigated NIGDEC and the mitigation monitoring program prepared for the Greyhawk 3 project is set forth in attachments F and G of the staff report packet. Approve the Eureka Grove vesting tentative subdivision map as shown in attachment C of the staff report, subject to the modified conditions of approval, and approve the conditional use permit modification as shown in attachment D of the staff report packet. And the above are subject to the findings contained in the staff report. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Actually, before we go to commission, how about we have the applicant, if they want to make a presentation, and then we'll take questions of the commission to staff and to the applicant. So.
Thank you, commissioners, for allowing me to speak today, and thank you to Chris and the county staff for the presentation. We do appreciate it. My name is Justin Walters. I'm the Vice President of Land for the New Home Company. Over the last 10 years, we've built 3 subdivisions within Granite Bay, and this is our 4th one. And when we purchased this project from a previous developer, which had some of these unique conditions already established. And our goal when developing architecture was to develop the single-family houses without being 2-story. We wanted to have single-level housing to meet that buyer demographic. And in order to do that and work within the confines of the unique conditions for the single-family housing with those PYEs that Chris was explaining, we thought the best thing to do was create ADUs. And we felt that those ADUs were a win-win. It allowed us to have some of the features that we wanted to include in the floor plans. It allowed us to meet our demographic buyer, which is second move up or empty nesters moving down that desire that single level living, but also due to COVID and some demographic changes, need an at-home office, at-home flex spaces, or may have that boomerang children coming back to live with them. What we didn't want to do is build a bunch of 2-story houses. So when creating these ADUs, we went back to the county and worked with staff and thought that the best thing we could do, this win-win, would allow us these amenities, also help the county with some of the RENA requirements that the county's working through. So in short, we just felt that those ADUs really checked all of our boxes for us as well as helping the county, and thought this would be a great opportunity to provide something that currently isn't being provided much in the market. And with that, I'm here to answer any questions or comments that you may have, and I'll do my best to do so.
All right, so
question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the ADU, when somebody wants to build a house, the ADU is optional, as I understand it. And so what I'm wondering is, just off the top of my head, what's the incentive? Is there incentives to go with building an ADU that?
The way that we design these two plans is that the Plan 1 comes with a standard ADU.
Okay.
As you can see here on the left of the screen. The Plan 2 is optional. So that would give the buyer the ability to purchase that or not, whereas the Plan 1 comes standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
How many Plan 1s do you have that on there?
We do not pre-plot this community, but we have internally believed that we will have approximately 14 Plan 1s and 14 Plans 2s. We've done a 50-50 split. We will have 2 model units, and we will model a Plan 1 as well as the Plan 2 that does not have the ADU, so that our buyers can see both of our product types and see what floor plan better fits their needs.
All right. Okay, I guess maybe to follow up on the Plan 1s, is there some kind of a government or county incentive for somebody to go ahead and get a Plan 1?
Not that I'm aware of. No additional incentives that I know about through the county.
Okay, but basically it's going to be the same cost, Plan 1, Plan 2?
Yep, exactly. Plan 1, Plan 2, and each plan type has 3 different elevations to them, and then even within those elevations, there's different color schemes and stone exteriors, just so that we have a very diverse architectural neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
Other questions of the commission? Dan?
Yeah, just a couple of questions for disclosure. We've met a couple of times with Supervisor Jones and actually walked the site as well. Question for the applicant and also for staff, really. If we, in this particular proposal, the issues with Greyhawk are really most relevant at Site 9 and Site 10, right? And so would you have an objection if we were to restrict this recommendation such that Site 9 and Site 10 did not include an ADU option?
We would have no objections to that.
Okay. Does the staff have any comment on that?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, the existing resident here, I haven't heard from, that they would have potentially 300 square feet of ADU, about 11 or 12 feet from the shared boundary. So it would be fairly close. Keep in mind, if this was developed traditionally with normal lots and no HOA strip here, an ADU could be 4 feet from their property line based on state law. So it's farther than what it could be, but they are constrained by their building envelopes as it's designed. But we'd have no objection if New Home Company is willing to restrict it. And do you want to make that a condition of approval? We're ready to provide an option in the development standards for those lots.
So I don't.
But under state law. Yeah, Sean, if you could talk about that, because there's state laws allowed you to do this stuff no matter what, right?
So I just want to clarify when you say preclude ADUs. So it would preclude ADUs from going into that area. The unit would still be, I mean, as a property owner, they would still be able to build an ADU. It just wouldn't be in that space where they're, because under state law, they're allowed on any single-family home.
Okay,
so
fair enough.
Yeah.
I guess, is there, since the applicant is willing, I mean, we've walked the site, we've had this conversation. Since the applicant is willing to, I guess restrict was a wrong language, but in other words, they're building 14 units that will not have ADUs, at least at this point in time, and 14 that may, right? So what I am asking is there a way to ask the applicant to not put that ADU option which is what is being considered right now. In other words, we could say no to this entire thing, correct? Right now. We could say, no, we're not going to authorize these ADUs on this previously approved plan, correct?
Correct, but they would still be allowed to build an ADU. They could just go up. ADUs are allowed by right under state law.
Okay.
So, yes.
I'm not sure what we're approving then. If they can do it anyway, why are we approving this?
I think one way to attack this might be to change that minimum rear yard allotment for lots 9 and 10 in the development standards. Because right now you have a restriction of a 770 square foot. You could make that bigger for lots 9 and 10, which would not prohibit them from having an ADU, but would just mean that they couldn't do it in that rear yard spot.
Correct.
Is this approved by the HOA, and is the HOA going to release this land to be built on? Are we approving, if we approve this, is it still, or the land is still owned by the HOA, is that correct or not correct?
No.
And the HOA is the new home company because there's no homes built and the HOA hasn't been established yet. Or it may be established, but
Well, there's
no
a
members.
lot line right there where if we go back to that picture and you cross that red line,
Yeah.
is that all owned by you guys as the developer, correct?
So that area would it would shift from HOA owned to the buyer owned, but there are no owners in the project yet. They haven't started
Right.
home sales. So it would just be CC&Rs and the map would have to change and the whole discussion about PYEs and the CC&Rs would have to go away. So they'd have to submit new CC&Rs to the county for review. So it's a paperwork exercise if it gets approved.
But then if somebody bought that lot and goes to state law, they could still build their ADUs beyond that up to 4 feet of the lot line.
Well, we would have that standard that has a minimum outdoor rear use area
Right.
to try to hem them in. And if they wanted to build an ADU, they'd have to go to a second level or convert part of their existing house to a ADU.
So the brown area is the part that's supposed to be owned by the HOA?
Correct. And that would go away and it'd be the new backyard for the buyer. And then we have a standard that says the main residence has to be at least 18 feet from this new backyard line. So a new home company couldn't build lot plan 7 over to here and then be 10 feet. So we keep that main residence pushed back, allow 300 square feet of ADU in the former PY private yard easement area, and then cap it by saying you need at least 700 square feet of outdoor usable space in the rear. So the buyer can't go from 300 to 600 square feet after they move in. If they want to, they're going to have to build upstairs.
They have to go up.
Right.
And those are right now all currently single-story homes, correct?
The plan is for all single stories.
Is there height restrictions in that neighborhood or that you can't go up? Or
It's 36 feet, so it's a voluntary action by new home. The market is single-story living. Don't want a lot of stairs for people to have to go up and down.
Dan, have you heard from those residents whether they'd rather have an ADU single level or?
Right.
Oh, sorry.
I do know that I think New Home has done a good job here in trying to keep these to single story, and there's several reasons why they would want to do that. And so I don't think there would be a real interest. It would, I think, cause a lot of turmoil in this particular proposal to go to a two-story type of arrangement on ADU. Look, all I'm suggesting here, following conversations with New Home, which was very good about this, is that where we are really, I mean, if you stand there and watch it, it's pretty close to Greyhawk. And so, and it's really only 2 units. And since I fully support the ADU concept, I think it's personally, based on what I've heard today, a great idea. But if there's flexibility in where they're going to put these anyway, I am looking for a way to try to keep where it would be most onerous, which is site 9 and 10 with the existing community, out of that picture.
But that's
frankly,
why
it could happen anyway, but rather than rely on luck, maybe there's a way to put that language in. That's all I was asking.
How about we move on to public comment?
Sure.
Hear the public comment, and then we can bring it back for discussion. So Are there any other questions of the commission?
I have one question just on this topic for clarification, because the Greyhawk home, what's the distance of that home to the fence? What opportunity were they given on the other side of the fence line? How far is that?
You know, it's probably 15 feet, I'm guesstimating.
Just to clarify your question, are you speaking to the yellow area between the outer fence of lot
Actually,
9, 10?
the back
and
of
the
house under that D1, it's pretty close to the property line. So it's in the Greyhawk
the existing
subdivision
house.
itself, the existing house.
Yeah, how far is that?
I don't know off the top of my head. We had our engineers take a look at that, and I believe it was around 50 feet.
50?
50.
Oh,
That's my recollection.
Okay.
One is quite distant and one is quite close, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks more closer.
One's very close and one's quite
Yeah.
distant.
It's maybe,
Right.
I bet you it's
Yeah, we did have, I could probably look that up for you. I don't have that information on me, but we did have our engineers create different measurements from from the back property line of those lots to the existing houses.
Okay.
I just don't have that
Okay,
information.
that's helpful for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair, if I
Yes.
could, I apologize, but if I could just, rather than go to public comment and then come back to this, I do have a couple, or actually really one or two more questions.
Yeah,
Is
but
that okay?
we're beginning to discuss the approval of the project rather
Okay.
than taking comments. So
Okay, that's fine.
So
Okay.
we're in a stage now where the commission is to ask questions for clarification, go to public comment, and then we'll bring it back
Okay.
for the discussion. Okay. So how about we open it up for public comment? Anyone in the audience who wants to speak? Seeing none, okay, we have no one online, so at that time, we're going to close the public. What? Somebody just raised their hand, all right.
Mr. Nelson, please state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Yes, my name is Reverend Virgil Nelson, and I am a volunteer with Placer People of Faith Together. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay. We testified to encourage the county to create a zoning overlay to allow faith-based organizations to construct new supportive and/or affordable housing on church property by right. We applaud you for including several of our suggestions in this housing element draft, most notably HE 34, zoning for residential on religious property. We want to be clear that our goal is not just residential housing, but specifically affordable housing with at least 50% of the units being mandated for low and very low income families. Allowing affordable housing on church property has many advantages.
Yeah, sir. The housing element was adopted or recommended for adoption by the Planning Commission as a previous item, and we're now talking about the Eureka Grove subdivision. But the housing element, Planning Commission recommended to the Board of Supervisors to adopt it as presented.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that this was public comment on the housing element. I apologize.
Not a problem. Thank you for your comments. Any other comment? Okay, we have.
Ms. Jackson, please state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Joanne Jackson. I live across the way in Hillsborough. My side yard is Eureka. I love the fact that it's 1 stories. I don't even necessarily mind that much of the ADU concept, but I am worried about, and I was worried about this initially, the one entrance and exit from that development onto Eureka. Since we have so much trouble making a left-hand turn, we can't get out of there during school hours. Adding the ADUs just adds another set of population in addition to all the houses that are in there. That one entrance and exit is still bothering me for the amount of people that are now going to be capable of living in there.
Thank you. Do we have other comments? Okay, no other comments. So at this point in time, I will close the public comment period, bring it back for either staff response, if necessary, or the commission discussion. So Dan, now's the time to ask your questions.
Thank you. Yeah, this actually is a great segue from Ms. Jackson's comments. This is for those of you who don't drive this very often, I can tell you this is a very congested area, especially during school. The high school is located really probably within 3/4 of a mile of this particular site, and people drive pretty quickly down here. So I think that her concern is valid. What I'm not certain about is that the addition of ADUs, let's say 14 ADUs or 20 ADUs, frankly, let's say it turns out to be 20, whatever the number really is, that an additional 20 vehicles in this area is going to complicate things significantly. It's already pretty complicated there. Potentially a 4-way stop sign may need to go in there just to slow traffic down, or ultimately a traffic light, because trying to turn left out of there at certain times of the day is going to be very hard. So here's the question for staff, though. Has this addition of the ADUs been evaluated from a traffic engineering perspective or a traffic flow perspective at all?
That was in the environmental document that Chris discussed.
Okay, perhaps I missed it, but so my apologies then.
I can start with the project entrance. So when this project was originally being reviewed by the county, I believe the first iteration was an access on Eureka and also an access on Sierra College. County staff, due to the volume today on Sierra College and the projected volume, they frowned upon the Sierra College entrance, especially for a residential development, and made it a one entrance only on Eureka. Having an entrance on Sierra College was complicated. Didn't want to be too close to the signal. If you put it up here, you would need an acceleration lane, which would mean widening of the road over the creek, which would be an expensive proposition. So EVA is an ideal, EVA only here at the northwest corner, and then full access here. I'm not going to speak to traffic volume or safety. Stephanie Holloway from Public Works is here. We know Eureka Road is busy. There is a long-term plan to add a signal at Grayhawk in Eureka. The timing of that is unknown. It's in the capital improvement plan. This project didn't trigger that improvement, and other recent projects have not triggered that improvement for the signalization anyway. Eureka Road is here. It's city jurisdiction. We do have Roseville across the street. So any kind of fix here would have to be a city-county fix. This intersection, or the signal here at Grayhawk, would be a county project. And I think staff does concur that the addition of even up to 28 ADUs isn't going to have a very measurable increase based on the existing volume, increase in traffic based on the existing volume on Eureka Road today. And we do agree that the high school traffic is an issue. It can back up all the way into almost the front of this project and drop off.
Okay, I'm satisfied.
I'm a little bit confused here.
Okay.
Okay, so at any rate, now on the east side of the project, are all those houses going to be built with either Plan 1 or Plan 2 that include an ADU?
Correct. So two product types, the half plexes on the west, and then the 28 detached single-family, single-story on the east.
On the very east side.
Right. So this is.
But basically, we're talking about line 9 and 10, and they could actually build the ADU within 4 feet of the property line?
No, I was just using it as an example if this was a traditional subdivision with normal lots. someone could build an ADU 4 feet from the shared boundary with the existing Greyhawk neighborhood on the east. On this one, there is an HOA, a 10-foot strip between the proposed new lot line and the neighbors to the east. So the closest an ADU on these lots would be the 10 feet plus 2 feet, or actually 4 feet, so 14 feet from the new property line. So they would go down.
Line.
Right.
And so if the adjacent owner has 20 feet, then it's 34 feet.
30 feet. But keep in mind that this owner can build an ADU 4 feet from this property line.
Which one's that now?
The existing homeowners in the Greyhawk neighborhood,
Yeah?
they could build an ADU 4 feet from their property line.
Okay, and so I guess basically then I'm wondering, well, all these, every one of these is going to have the ADU or the office built into them, right?
No.
Not all of them. Plan 1 is standard, but they can opt out of that one-bedroom ADU. Plan 2 doesn't have an ADU as standard. They can build the studio on the back of Plan 2.
Okay, so what I'm getting at now, in just trying to put this in perspective in my mind, is the developer has an option here, where if the people opposite 9 and 10 would like to talk to the developer, and the developer has already indicated that he's willing to make changes there. And so I guess what I'm questioning is why we as a commission would want to make changes here, because this is something that can be negotiated after the hearing when we've had our say.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to the commission. Do you want to lock that in and ensure that there's going to be no ADUs in the back of 9 and 10, or leave it up to a private negotiation to get that worked out? Here, if you do it at this level, we change the conditions of approval specific to those 2 lots. It basically limits the ADUs in the rear. Meanwhile, I mean, New Home Company can come to an agreement with the owners over here and say, well, we're not going to build ADUs here.
Right.
Well, the future buyer said, well, I'm not bound to that unless there's a deed restriction. I'm going to build an ADU. So
yeah, so I guess that's what I'm wondering. You know, the adjacent property owner wasn't at the hearing today.
No.
To make a statement about, and the adjacent property owner can do an ADU within 4 feet of the property line.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm questioning if this is something that they can agree to by talking directly with the development company, then I guess I'd lean towards not coming down with the hammer today and making it codified in the use permit.
Other discussion items from the commission?
I think that's a good point. You know, I do. You know, I learned a little bit from this discussion, so that's what this is all about. I will say this, you know, having walked this area, I think this proposal is an excellent proposal. It's good for the county. The ADUs are good for the county. I don't think there's going to be an appreciable traffic issue there. I mean, it's a mess anyway. We're going to need to deal with it. But my thought is this, though. Having walked this with New Home and with Supervisor Jones, there really did not seem to be any issue except potentially at 9 and 10. And so my thought was, rather than potentially create an issue between landowners, whether it's legal or not, especially in an area where flexibility has already been integrated into this proposal. In other words, the advocate has no issues with this restriction. Plus, you know, we may have 19 or 17 or 21 of these go in. He's not asking for 28. He's asking for up to 28, but there's a lot of flexibility here. Why not apply some of that flexibility to prevent any potential conflict downstream when we have the opportunity to do so and the advocate does not care? So that's the logic behind it. On the other hand, I recognize what you just described is a very logical approach to it.
All right. Other commission comment? Anthony?
If you go back to the big map by lot 9 on 9B, is that road on Sierra College wide enough to use as an emergency exit for people if there was something to happen in that neighborhood with having only one ingress egress place?
Yeah, I believe it's at least 20 feet wide at the north. And that is the purpose, to get out or fire department to get in.
Okay. That was it.
Right. Other questions or discussion? If not, entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion that we adopt the addendum to the 2016 negative declaration and mitigation monitoring plan prepared for the Greyhawk 3 project as set forth in the attachments F and G of the staff report packet.
Just a slight modification, I believe. This slight modification, it should just be attachment F in the staff report packet.
It says attachments F and G, and you said just F?
Yes.
Okay, so G is not part of that, okay.
Oh, G is not part of it? I was just reading what was up.
Okay, his motion acknowledges that, so second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second roll call.
Could I ask for clarification, though? If I asked for a modification to this, when would that be considered?
That would be at the map approval, which is item number 2, and the use permit, which would be number 3.
Yeah. So this is just the environmental documentation.
Oh, my apologies. Okay.
So is it an adequate environmental document is really the question being asked. Okay. Sue, we have a first and a second.
I have a first from Mr. Johnson. Was that second from Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So a vote from Mr. DiMattei?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Woodward?
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
And Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, I further make a motion to approve the Eureka Grove vesting tentative map, or tentative subdivision map as shown in attachment C of the staff report packet, subject to the modified conditions of approval. Now, did we modify any conditions of approval?
Yeah, so I could speak to that and see if I get concurrence from your commission and Chris. But on page 55 of the staff report package, condition number 123, there's a matrix there, and under building envelopes, it talks about the building envelope from adjacent residential use, and the old condition was 22 feet minimum, the new condition 10 feet minimum. So the proposal would be 10 feet minimum except 22 feet for lots 9 and 10. And what that does is keep the building envelope the same as it is as originally approved. So with disregard to whether there's an ADU or not, we're talking about structures and distances, and so it would remain the same for 9 and 10. Is that accurate? $18 feet instead of the 22 feet. So I guess that's back to your commission if that 18 foot for the envelope works.
I have a question for Dan, since this is your district. The people who live behind 9 and 10, we have not heard from them, but would they rather have something closer to their fence or something up above the fence where people are going to be able to see into their backyard? So if we're restricting them, not have this ADU an extra 10 feet, they do have the option to go up. So now those people are going to look at a 2-story house instead of a single-story house. So I hate to see those people get restricted and then have to go up and then have those neighbors go, now I got to look at a 2-story house.
Yeah, I think, I would, this is be hypothetical because I don't know what their views would be, but my guess would be that they would certainly want something that's 1 story and not 2. On the other hand, just because they have the option of building a 1-story, apparently, doesn't mean that they couldn't build a 2-story anyway. So if there is really no restriction on what this ADU might ultimately look like, if it's not built by new home, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think it's a relatively moot point. Because theoretically, they could just come back and build a two-story, whether we've given the option to do a one or not,
complete
right?
my motion if I could.
Sure.
But if we do that, we're handcuffing them to go up instead of go out. If we put limitations on 9 and 10, we're telling them you can't go out, but you can go up, which may be more relevant to the people who live behind there, which you're looking out for, which I totally understand.
Yeah.
And if I lived in that house behind 9 and 10, I'd rather see them go out than out.
I would as well. I don't know what their thoughts would be, but I would.
So, but if we're going to handcuff them not to do that, why would we do that?
How about we finish the motion to find out if the conditions are changed or not pursuant, and then we can have a discussion on the motion, so.
And if I could just touch on that real quick. The recommendation that's up there mentions modified conditions of approval. That's because there were conditions of approval with the project originally. Right. So the reference in the one that's up on the board to modified conditions does not include the modification that was being discussed.
This is
right
the
now.
one that was in the staff report.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
And so, let me see, did I read it all the way through?
You did.
Okay, so that's my motion.
I second that.
So we have a first and second on the motion that is read exactly as shown in the staff report, and no modifications to lots 9 and 10, just to be clear. This is as proposed. So roll call, please, Sue.
I have a first from Mr. Johnson, a second from Mr. Herzog, so a vote from Mr. DiMattei, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Woodward.
I appreciate the discussion. It was good. I vote no on that.
Mr. Herzog.
Yes.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
And Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I further approve the conditional use permit modification as shown in attachment D of the staff report package.
And that should also be subject to the modified conditions of approval as well.
Using the same language, subject to the modified approval.
Oh, subject to the modified conditions of approval.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Roll call, please, Sue.
First from Mr. Johnson, a second from Mr. Herzog, so vote for Mr. DiMattei, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Woodward.
Yes.
Mr. Herzog.
Yes.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
And Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we have an approval. So the decision of the Planning Commission may be appealed by anyone who appeared at today's hearing and provided comment, or anyone that submitted written comments on the item. An appeal must be filed within 10 days of today's date and shall be accompanied by a filing fee of $619. With that, the meeting is adjourned.